The station floated in space like a giant metal city. It had no ground, no sky, and no sun. Just cold stars pressing against every window, and the low hum of machines keeping everyone alive. Conclave Platform Vareth 9 was the name of the place. It was where the most powerful species in the galaxy came to talk instead of fight. Every few years, they gathered here to renew something called the Galactic Accord, a long agreement that kept the peace between dozens of worlds. It was important, it was old, and it was most of the time very boring. But not this time. Sergeant Elias Cord stood near the back wall of the main hall and watched the room fill up. He was not a tall man. He was not the most impressive-looking person in the room, not by a long way. He had short dark hair, a jaw that looked like it had been hit once or twice, and brown eyes that moved slowly and carefully around every space he walked into. He wore the gray uniform of Earth's small diplomatic security unit. No medals, no decorations, just the uniform and a sidearm he had not touched in 3 years. He was Earth's only guard. That fact alone made some of the aliens in the room laugh. The Dravathi delegation had 40 guards. Each one stood nearly 3 meters tall and wore armor that could stop a tank shell. The Oran Collective had sent a squad of silent, four-armed soldiers who moved in perfect unison, like one creature split into many bodies. The Craft Dominion's guards did not even look like guards. They looked like weapons that had learned to stand upright. And then there was Elias Cord. One man, one sidearm, standing near the wall with his hands behind his back, looking at everything and saying nothing. Ambassador Dren stood a few steps ahead of him. Dren was a good man, nervous, smart, always sweating slightly more than the situation called for. He kept tugging at his collar and looking back at Cord as if checking to make sure the wall hadn't eaten him. "You doing all right back there?" Dren asked quietly. "Yes, sir," Cord said. "Good, good, because this is going to be a very delicate." "I know, sir." Dren turned back to the front and kept tugging at his collar. The hall was enormous. The ceiling was so high it disappeared into soft light. The floor was made of some dark material that reflected everything like still water. Around the edges of the room, every delegation sat or stood according to their customs. Some on raised platforms, some on cushioned surfaces that pulsed gently, some simply floating in small personal gravity fields. Cord looked at all of it, and felt, as he always did, very human. The announcer, a tall alien with pale blue skin and a voice like a calm river, began naming the delegations as they took their places. Each name was followed by a ripple of acknowledgement through the room. Some species clicked their teeth. Some bowed. Some simply turned their eyes to the named group and stared, which in their culture apparently meant respect. Earth's name was called. There was a pause, a few quiet sounds that were probably the alien version of a polite chuckle. Dren smiled anyway. Cord kept his hands behind his back. Then the announcer said the name that changed the temperature of the room. The Velhari Empire. Her Highness, Princess Siraveth. The sound that moved through the hall was not loud. It was more like the feeling before a loud sound. Every species that had been talking went quiet. Every guard in the room straightened slightly, not out of threat response, out of instinct, out of something closer to awe. The doors at the far end of the hall opened. She walked in slowly. Princess Siraveth of the Velhari was tall, with silver skin that seemed to hold light inside it, rather than just reflect it. She had 4 eyes, 2 large ones in the normal position, 2 smaller ones just above them, all of a deep, liquid violet. She wore something that looked like dark water, shaped into clothing. Behind her walked 6 handmaidens in pale robes, and a high advisor, whose expression suggested he had not slept well in several decades. She did not look nervous. She did not look excited. She looked like someone who had seen everything the universe had to offer and was mildly curious whether today would offer anything new. She swept her gaze across the hall. Cord had heard about the Velhari before the mission. He had read the briefing 3 times. The Velhari could feel emotions the way other species could see colors. Not red minds, nothing so clear as that. They felt the emotional weight of a living being from across a room. They called it resonance, and Princess Cyriveth was, according to every source Cord had found, the most sensitive reader her species had produced in living memory. She could feel the mood of an entire room just by standing in it. She moved her gaze from delegation to delegation. She paused on the Krath Dominion. Her expression did not change, but something in her posture suggested she had tasted something unpleasant. She moved on. She reached the Orin Collective. A small flicker of what might have been interest crossed her face. She moved on. She passed over Earth's ambassador without pausing. Then her eyes landed on Cord. She stopped. It was not a slow stop or a graceful pause. It was the kind of stop that a person makes when they walk into a wall they did not see. Her whole body became still. Her 4 violet eyes fixed on him. The handmaidens behind her almost walked into her back. Cord looked at her. She looked at him. He did not look away. Not out of rudeness. He simply had no reason to. He had been watching everyone in the room. Now he was watching her. His expression was the same as it had been since he walked in. Calm, patient, mildly alert. The silence stretched. It was long enough that people began to notice. The Dravathi guards shifted. Ambassador Dren turned around slowly and gave Cord a look of complete panic. Cord gave him the smallest possible shake of his head, which he hoped communicated, "I am not doing anything. I am just standing here." The High Advisor leaned close to the princess and whispered something. She did not respond. She was still looking at Cord with those 4 violet eyes, and her silver face had gone very, very still. The way a face goes still when the mind behind it is working very hard. Then she leaned slightly toward her High Advisor. She said something in the Velhari tongue. It was barely a whisper. But the translator droid, clipped to Cord's collar, caught it and rendered it quietly into his ear. 1 word. Impossible. Then she looked away, composed herself in under a second, and walked to the Velhari delegation platform as if nothing had happened. But the room had seen it. And in the galaxy, when a Velhari princess went silent looking at something, that was not nothing. That was the kind of thing people wrote down. Cord unclenched his hands, which he had not realized he had clenched, and went back to watching the room. Dren appeared at his shoulder. "What," Dren whispered with great intensity, "was that?" "I don't know, sir," Cord said honestly. And that, for now, was the truth. The message arrived the next morning. Cord was sitting in the small room that Earth's delegation had been given. It was a fine room by station standards, clean, climate-controlled, with a window that looked out at a wide field of stars. He was drinking something that the station's food system claimed was coffee. It was not quite right. It was a little too sweet and a little too dark, but it was hot and that was enough. He was reading the daily security report when his communicator blinked. The message was short. It came through official Velhari diplomatic channels, which meant it had passed through 3 layers of encryption and 2 protocol officers before it reached him. The message itself was 6 words. Her Highness requests a private audience. Below that, a time and a room number. And then, in a line that had clearly been added almost as an afterthought, "With the human guard." Specifically. Cord read it twice. Then he picked up his coffee, took a sip, and went to find Dren. What followed was 40 minutes of Ambassador Dren walking in small circles. "She wants to see you," Dren said, stopping briefly. "Not me, you." "Yes, sir." "The most politically significant figure at this summit wants a private meeting with my security attaché." "That is correct, sir." Dren started walking in circles again. This is either the best thing that has ever happened to Earth's diplomatic mission, or it is going to cause a war. Cord considered this. Probably the first one, sir. You don't know that. No, but the second option doesn't improve if I don't go. Dren stopped walking. He pointed at Cord for a moment without saying anything. Then he straightened his collar. Fine. You go. You say nothing political. Nothing about resources, nothing about trade routes, nothing about the Accord. If she asks about Earth policy, you say you are not the right person for that question. Understood. And Cord, try not to do whatever you did yesterday that made her stop in the middle of a formal entrance. I was standing still, sir. Then keep standing still. Just in a room with her instead of across a hall. The room was smaller than Cord expected. It was a side chamber off the main diplomatic corridor, with curved walls and soft indirect lighting. There were no windows. The furniture was Velhari, low and smooth, clearly not designed for human backs, but Cord sat down without complaint and adjusted. The princess arrived with her 6 handmaidens and her high advisor. The advisor arranged himself near the door with an expression that suggested he was cataloging every possible way this meeting could go wrong. The handmaidens positioned themselves silently along the walls. Sisseraveth sat across from Cord. For a moment, she simply looked at him again. That same stillness from the hall came back to her face, that look of someone working something out. Cord waited. He was good at waiting. You are the guard, she said finally. Her voice was smooth and lower than he expected, and the translator in his ear kept pace easily. Yes, Your Highness. Not the ambassador. No, he is better at the talking parts. Something shifted very slightly in her expression. Not quite a smile, but a small movement at the corner of her mouth. I asked for you, she said, because I owe you an explanation. What I did yesterday, stopping in the hall in front of everyone, that was not nothing. People will talk. You deserve to know why it happened. Cord nodded once. I'd appreciate that. She folded her hands in her lap. My people feel emotional resonance. You have read about this, I assume. I was briefed, yes. Then you know we do not read thoughts. We do not see memories. We feel the weight of what a living being carries inside them. Old joy, old pain, fear that has been lived with so long it has become familiar. Love, anger, all of it leaves a mark, and we can feel those marks. She paused. Most species register as simple patterns. A few strong feelings layered over each other. Easy to read. Predictable. Cord said nothing. He was listening the way he listened to everything, completely, without interrupting. When I walked into that hall yesterday, Siraveth continued, I was doing what I always do, reading the room, feeling the weight of every delegation, and then my attention reached you. She stopped again. Her 4 violet eyes moved across his face slowly. You are not simple, she said. You are not a few feelings layered over each other. You were... She paused, searching for the right word. Full. Completely full. Grief on top of joy. Fear that had been turned into something else, something harder and more useful. Love that had been broken and then held together carefully. Anger that had been cooled down and shaped into patience. She tilted her head slightly. I have lived 200 years. I have read the resonance of thousands of beings. I have never encountered anything like what I felt from you across that hall. Cord was quiet for a moment. I am not special, he said, not among my people. I know, she said. That is the part that made me stop. He looked at her. Can I ask what you expected? Less, she said simply. Your species is new to the Accord. Your world is small. Your presence here is, forgive me, considered minor by most delegations. She said it without cruelty, just fact. I expected a simple reading, duty, mild alertness, standard emotional background. She paused. I did not expect to look at one soldier standing at the back of a room, and feel as though I was standing in front of something ancient and enormous. Cord was quiet for a moment. He looked at his hands. Then he looked back at her. "Can I tell you something about Earth?" he said. She gestured for him to continue, and so he talked. He told her about human history, not the clean version that went into diplomatic briefings, but the real one. He told her about wars that had burned entire cities to ash, and the people who had rebuilt those cities stone by stone. He told her about a species that had invented music, and also invented weapons capable of ending all life on their planet, and had chosen so far not to use those weapons. He told her about children who grew up with very little, and still found reasons to laugh. About people who lost everything they loved, and somehow got up the next morning. He told her that humans did not know how to stop feeling things, that they felt too much, always, too much love, too much fear, too much grief, and they had never found a way to turn it off. So they had learned instead to carry it, to keep moving with all of it on their backs. "We're not brave because we feel nothing," Cord said. "We're brave because we feel everything, and we move anyway." Sci-Fi listened without speaking. Her 4 eyes stayed on his face. When he finished, the room was very quiet. She sat with his words for a long moment. Then she said, softly, "I have a word in my language, Verath. It means the place where two opposites touch each other without destroying each other." She looked at him steadily. "I have spent my life looking for a species that lived inside that word." Before either of them could say anything else, the door opened. The High Advisor stepped inside, his face tight with urgency. "Your Highness," he said in Velhari, and the translator caught it. "There is a problem. The meeting has been noticed. 3 factions are already drawing conclusions. The Krath have moved ships." Siriveth did not look alarmed. She looked, if anything, tired. She stood. Then she looked at Cord one more time. "The galaxy," she said quietly, "was not ready for you." Cord stood as well, unhurried. "It rarely is," he said. Outside, the station was already starting to shake, not from engines, but from politics, which was sometimes worse. The main summit hall looked different, with fear in it. It was the same high ceiling, the same dark reflective floor, the same soft light that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere. But fear changed a room the way weather changed a sky. Everything felt heavier. The air moved differently. Species that had been politely ignoring each other an hour ago were now watching each other from across the room like they were measuring distances. Cord stood at the back again. Same wall, same posture. Hands behind his back, eyes moving slowly around the room. Ambassador Dren was at the front, doing what Dren did, talking fast, nodding a great deal, and trying to look like a man who had everything under control, while clearly having none of it. The accusation had come from the Krath Dominion. Their lead delegate was a being called High Commander Vreth, broad as a doorway, with dark armor plates that were part of his body rather than worn over it, and small yellow eyes that missed very little. He stood at the center of the floor and spoke loudly enough that the translators struggled to keep up. He said that Earth had performed something called soul binding. The translator offered a pause there, as though even the machine found the concept difficult. Soul binding in Velhari mythology was an old idea, the belief that a being with extreme emotional force could accidentally or deliberately trap a Velhari reader in a kind of pull, like a strong gravity field. Like being caught in something you could not stop looking at. Vreth said that the human soldier had done this to the princess, that the private meeting was proof, that Earth was trying to use the Velhari Empire's most gifted reader as a political tool. Several delegations stirred. Not all of them believed it, but enough of them were uncertain. Siriveth sat at the Velhari platform, very still, her expression unreadable. She was not allowed to speak in her own defense under Summit Protocol, not without appearing biased, which would make things worse. Her high advisor sat beside her with his hands folded and his jaw tight. Dren attempted a response. It was not his finest moment. He used the phrases deeply unfounded, profound misunderstanding, and absolute good faith 3 times each. And the more he spoke, the more the room seemed to lean toward Vreth's side, simply because Vreth sounded certain and Dren sounded frightened. Cord watched all of this. Then he did something that surprised Dren, surprised the room, and possibly surprised himself. He walked forward. He moved through the crowd of diplomatic staff until he reached the speaking floor. He stopped a few steps from Vreth, who looked at him the way a large animal looks at a smaller one, with the patient contempt of something that assumes it has already won. "I would like to speak," Cord said. The hallmaster looked uncertain. Cord was not on the approved speaker list, but there was no specific rule against it, and the room was already looking at him. So after a beat, the hallmaster nodded. He did not look at anything except the room in front of him. He started talking. "I don't know what soul binding is," he said. "I had never heard that word before today. Where I come from, we don't have a concept like that, because we're not really aware that the rest of the galaxy can feel us across a room." He paused. "We didn't know. We were never told. Nobody tested us. We just showed up, and apparently, we're louder than we look." A few beings in the room exchanged glances. Some of the tension shifted. Not gone, but changed slightly in shape. "I want to tell you about a planet," Cord said. "Not to impress you, just because I think it explains some things." He told them about Earth. He didn't use grand language. He kept it simple, the way he kept most things. He told them that humans had been fighting each other for thousands of years, not because they were evil, but because they were complicated, and the world was hard. He told them about a war so large it had covered most of the planet, and how in the middle of that war, men sitting in ditches had written letters home to people they loved. He told them about a fire that killed 3 astronauts on the launch pad, and how 6 years later, humans had landed on their moon anyway, because the people who came after decided that stopping was not an option. He told them about music written by people who were starving, about hospitals built in places where no one had any money, about a species that kept failing and kept getting back up, not because they were programmed to, not because their biology demanded it, but because they had decided, again and again, each generation on its own, that the future was worth the cost of the present. "We carry a lot," Cord said. "We've been carrying it for a long time. We don't know how to put it down. Maybe that's what the princess felt." He looked briefly toward the Velhari platform. "I didn't do anything to her. I was just standing there being human, which apparently is already a lot." The hall was quiet. Vreth made a short sound that might have been contempt. "Fine words," he said, "but words do not explain why one of the most guarded minds in the galaxy stopped in a public hall and requested a private meeting with a low-ranked soldier." "With respect," Cord said, "she stopped because she had never seen anything like it before. That's not manipulation, that's curiosity. She's a scientist, in her way. She found something she couldn't explain, and she went to look closer." He paused. "If your people had done the same thing, I'd say the same about you." Syraveth stood. The room reacted instantly. Standing out of turn during summit floor discussion was a serious protocol breach. Her high advisor looked like he was going to have a medical event. But she stood, and she spoke, and no one stopped her. "I will say this once," she said, her voice even and clear. "What I perceived in this human was not a trap. It was not coercion. It was the most living thing I have ever encountered in 200 years. She looked directly at Vreth. "I am not compromised. I am paying attention. There is a difference." She sat back down. The hall murmured. Vreth's yellow eyes moved from the princess to Cord and back again. Whatever he was calculating, he did not say it. He turned and walked back to his platform. The hallmaster called a recess. Cord walked back to the wall. Dren appeared at his side within seconds. That was either very brave or very stupid, Dren whispered. Probably both, Cord said. Sir? Dren looked at the Velhari platform, where Sireveth sat again, in perfect stillness. Did you know she was going to stand up? Cord was quiet for a moment. No. Outside the station's hall, the sensors showed the Krath fleet still in position. 7 warships, still watching, still measuring. The recess, everyone understood, was not going to solve anything. The real problem was still out there, waiting in the dark. The alarm was quiet. Not the kind of alarm that screamed. It was a low, steady tone that pushed through the walls of the station like a slow heartbeat. The kind of sound designed not to cause panic, but to make sure everyone knew something was wrong. Cord heard it before anyone announced it. He was already moving. The station's command deck was 3 levels up, accessible by a narrow corridor that smelled of metal and recycled air. By the time Cord reached it, the screens were already lit with the sensor feeds, and 2 station officers were talking over each other. Dren arrived a minute later, slightly out of breath. The Krath fleet had moved. Not toward the station, not yet, but they had shifted formation, spreading their 7 warships into a wide pattern that covered the only direct exit route from the station into open space. It was a professional move, designed to say one thing clearly: nothing leaves until we say so. At the edge of that exit route sat Earth's single ship, the ESV Resolute. Cord looked at it on the screen. A mid-class cruiser, solid enough, fast enough, but nothing compared to even 1 Krath warship, let alone 7. The Resolute's captain was a woman named Harlow. He had met her once, briefly. She had the kind of face that did not change much, regardless of what was happening around it. "Can we open a channel?" Cord asked one of the station officers. The officer looked at him, then at Dren, who nodded. A moment later, Harlow's voice came through the speaker. "Cord," she said, not a greeting exactly, more like an acknowledgement. "Captain, you see them. I've been watching them rearrange themselves for the last 20 minutes. They're good. Textbook formation for containment. We're not running. I didn't think you were. 7-1 isn't ideal, but they haven't fired. They're sending a message." "Yes," Cord said. "Can you make them hear a different one?" There was a silence on the line. Then Harlow said, "What do you need?" "Time. Keep them occupied. Don't shoot first. Don't get shot. Just be difficult." Another pause. "We can do difficult," she said. The channel closed. On the screen, the Resolute began to move. It did not move the way the Krath expected. It did not retreat toward the station for shelter, and it did not make any kind of aggressive approach toward the Krath line. Instead, it moved sideways, into the shadow of the station itself, using the bulk of the platform to change the geometry of the situation. The Resolute moved again, this time toward the gravity edge of the planet below, where the natural pull would make targeting calculations harder. Cord watched this with the quiet attention he gave to everything. Sireveth entered the command deck. No one had invited her, no one stopped her either. She walked to stand beside Cord and looked at the screens. Her high advisor stood in the doorway, not following her in, but not leaving either. "Your ship," she said. "Yes. 1. Yes." She watched the Resolute slide between the station's underbelly and the planet's upper atmosphere. The Krath were repositioning again. Their formation was beginning to stretch slightly, each ship having to cover a wider angle as the Resolute refused to be predictable. "They cannot hit what they cannot predict," Sireveth said quietly. "That's the idea," Cord said. One of the station officers spoke up. "Commander Vreth is hailing the Resolute. He is telling them to hold position or be fired upon." Cord waited. On the screen, the Resolute did a slow half-turn and used the edge of the station's solar collection ring as a shield. Not enough protection against a direct hit, but enough to limit firing angles. 3 of the craft ships would now be shooting at each other to hit the Resolute. They stopped moving. "Your captain is very calm," Syraveth said. "She is," Cord agreed. "How does she do it?" Cord thought about it. She doesn't think about the 7 ships. She thinks about the one thing she can do next, and then the thing after that. The princess looked at him. "Is that a human skill?" "It's a survival skill," he said. "We've had a lot of time to practice it." While the Resolute kept the craft fleet looking outward, something else was happening inside the station. Cord was aware of it the way he was aware of most things. At the edge of his attention, growing steadily. Dren was working. The ambassador had disappeared from the command deck early, and Cord had not worried about it. Dren was not useful in a tactical situation. But a tactical situation was only part of the problem. The bigger part was the same as it always had been. The other delegations. The ones sitting on the fence. The ones watching the craft and calculating whether the Dominion's move would succeed. Dren knew every delegate's name. He had studied files on all of them before the mission, the way Cord had studied the security layouts. He knew which ones cared about trade access, and which ones cared about territorial guarantees, and which ones were quietly afraid of the craft, and just needed someone to say out loud what they were all thinking privately. He went to them, in side rooms and corridors, and even standing in the food provision area with a cup of something warm. He talked to them, personally, specifically, not about Earth, about them. Cord found out about this later. At the time, he was watching the screens. The craft lead ship sent a final warning to the Resolute. Harlow responded by moving the Resolute into the one position that forced the entire craft formation to either open a gap or risk their own ship's firing lines crossing. It was a small move, elegant, like a chess piece placed on a square that made 4 other squares suddenly dangerous. Then, the diplomatic signal came. The Orvathi Federation filed a formal sanction against the craft Dominion for unprovoked military posturing at a neutral Accord station. That was expected. The Orvathi and the craft were old rivals. But then, the Dravathi bloc filed the same sanction. Then, the Oran Collective. Then 2 smaller species that almost never took formal positions on anything. One by one, in the space of 11 minutes, 5 separate galactic powers formally put their names to a document that said, "The craft Dominion is wrong, and the galaxy is watching." On the screen, the craft formation paused. The ships held their positions. Nothing moved for a long moment. Then slowly, the formation began to pull back. Not fleeing, the craft would never flee, but retreating to a distance that said, "This is no longer worth the cost." The station let out a breath that was not a breath, the sound of many beings in a pressurized space simultaneously relaxing. Syraveth was still standing beside Cord. "Your ambassador," she said. "He did that." "Yes, while you kept our attention here. We tend to work better in pairs," Cord said. She was quiet for a moment. Then, "You were afraid." He looked at her. She was watching him with those 4 violet eyes, reading what was underneath the surface. "Yes," he said simply. "I could feel it the entire time." She paused. "And yet you did not show it." "Showing it wouldn't have helped anyone," he said. She looked at him for a long time. When she spoke again, her voice was quieter than before, as though she was saying something she had been holding for a while. "In 200 years," she said, "I have never seen anything like your people." Cord looked back at the stars, where the craft fleet was still slowly moving away. "Most people haven't," he said. "We tend to look smaller than we are." The closing ceremony of the Galactic Accord was not usually a memorable event. It followed a set pattern that had not changed in many decades. The Hall Master read the terms of the renewed agreement. Each delegation's leader placed their mark on the document. There was a formal statement of peace. Then everyone went home. It was important, but not exciting. The kind of important that looked like paperwork. This time was different. Earth was not signing as an observer. For the first time in the history of the Accord, a motion had been filed to elevate a species from minor observer status to full member. The motion had been filed by the Velhari Empire. It had passed by a margin that surprised everyone who had been paying attention, and surprised no one who had been paying real attention. Dren signed on behalf of Earth, with a hand that shook only slightly. Cord stood behind him. Same wall, same posture. But the room felt different now than it had 2 days ago, when he had stood in this same spot and watched the Velhari princess walk in and stop. A lot had happened in 2 days. After the formal signing, the hallmaster made the usual closing remarks. Then he said something unusual. He announced that Princess Siraveth of the Velhari had requested to add a personal statement to the galactic record, a formal entry that would be transmitted to every world in the Accord. The room stilled. Siraveth rose from her seat. She walked to the center of the floor with the same calm she always carried, her silver skin holding the room's light, her 4 eyes looking out across the assembled delegations. She spoke slowly, so the translators could keep pace. "My people have a word," she said. "Verath. It is old, older than our empire, older than our recorded history. It is the word for the place where 2 opposites touch, without destroying each other. A pressure point, a balance, a place of extraordinary stability that should not exist, and does anyway." She paused. "We have looked for that word in the living world for as long as we have existed. We have hoped to find a people who did not just understand it, but embodied it." The hall was completely silent. 3 days ago, she said, "I walked into this room and looked across the hall and saw a human soldier standing at the back of a room. And I knew." She did not look at Cord directly, but everyone else did. "He is not special among his people," she said. "That is the important part. He is ordinary. He was doing an ordinary job in an ordinary way, and what I felt from him, from one single ordinary human, was the most complex, layered, contradictory, and alive thing I have ever perceived." She let that settle for a moment. "I have since spoken at length with this human and with others from his world. And I want to say, for the record, because the record should carry this, that humanity is not what we thought it was." She turned slowly, addressing the whole room. "We thought they were new. We thought they were small. We thought they were unremarkable. We were wrong. What they are is beyond any category we have had for them. They are a people who have been broken 1,000 times and rebuilt themselves every time. A people who carry grief and joy in the same moment without splitting apart. A people who invented kindness in the same century they invented weapons capable of ending their world, and chose kindness anyway, enough times to still be here." Her voice was steady and quiet. "They are Verath walking." The room did not erupt. It did not cheer. It absorbed. That was, in its own way, more powerful. After the ceremony, a team of xenobiologists from 3 different species requested permission to conduct a study. They had been thinking about what the princess said. They wanted to test it, carefully, non-invasively. They wanted to measure the emotional resonance readings of human beings and compare them to the galactic average. The results came back the same day, the average being registered between 3 and 12 distinct emotional frequency bands. Every human they tested broke the measuring equipment. When they recalibrated and ran the tests again, the numbers came through clearly. The average human carried 847 distinct emotional frequency bands. Not a few, not dozens. 847. The scientists checked their equipment 3 more times. The equipment was fine. The study team released its findings to the Accord database with a note at the bottom that read, in careful scientific language, that the team believed humans were not more emotionally complex because of some special biological gift, but because they had never had the option to be simple. Their history had been too hard, too long, and too full of everything. They had been forced, generation after generation, to feel more than other species ever had, and still survive. And so they had become, without knowing it, without trying, the most emotionally deep life forms ever recorded. The note also added, more quietly, that the reason no one had discovered this before was straightforward. Most species, when they looked at a human, saw nothing unusual. They did not display their emotions like some species did, brightly, loudly, across their skin or in their posture. They kept most of it inside. They had learned to, because the alternative was being consumed by it. What looked like blankness was not blankness. It was compression. It was a star so bright you could not look at it directly, and so you thought it was dim. The only being sensitive enough to look directly was Sci-Fi, and she had seen it from across a hall. 3 years later, Cord stood at a window in the Valhari Imperial Palace. The view was extraordinary. The palace was built into the side of a mountain range that caught the planet's double sunrise every morning, and the light that came through the windows at dawn was unlike anything he had ever seen on Earth, warm and silver at the same time, as though the sun could not decide what color it wanted to be. He was Earth's first official ambassador to the Valhari Empire. It was a position that had not existed 3 years ago. He still did not say much. He still stood with his hands behind his back, in rooms he was not sure about. He still drank bad imitation coffee in the mornings, and read security reports he did not strictly need to read anymore. Some things did not change. Sci-Fi found him at the window, as she often did. They had done this many times over 3 years, stood together in quiet, and watched something beautiful, and said very little about it. After a while she asked, as she sometimes did, whether he found it strange. Knowing what he carried, knowing what they had discovered. He thought about it for a moment. Not really, he said. We always knew people were complicated. We just didn't know the rest of the galaxy hadn't figured that out yet. She made a sound that in Valhari translated roughly as a soft laugh, genuine and quiet, the kind that meant something had landed exactly right. The double sun moved higher above the mountains. Cord looked out at the light. He did not know, and would likely never fully understand, what it was that Sci-Fi felt when she stood near him. He could not feel what she felt. He could not read what she read. But he had come to understand that whatever she felt, it was real, and that she had chosen, again and again, to stand near it rather than away from it. That seemed like enough. Outside, the planet turned slowly in the light of its 2 suns, and between the 2 people standing at the window, 847 frequencies moved quietly in the space between them, ancient, loud in their silence, and entirely, stubbornly human.